I think I figured out how to predict which brands could potentially be incredibly popular in the next 5 to 10 years. I think there are things happening in the market and they are changing tastes, which some brands are better at addressing than others. I even think there may be a discernible formula for success. I'll give you a sneak peek. Tudor are going to be there. So are Audemars Piguet and Moser. But Jaeger-LeCoultre and Rolex, not as much. Those are some bold statements. So let's dive into my reasoning. Okay, so who's popular right now? Well, in terms of monetary success, the list is Rolex, Cartier, Omega, Patek, AP, Richard Mille, Longines, and Vacheron. That's at least according to the Morgan Stanley report. If I take Google's word for it, the most popular brands are AP, Rolex, Omega, Patek, some of the same ones. I also get Tudor, sometimes Longines. If I expand my criteria to things like independents and other smaller brands, Christopher Ward, Studio Underdog, Baltic, Moser, Swatch, maybe even IWC are making it onto the list. Brands that just generally aren't regarded as high flyers are Jaeger-LeCoultre, Panerai, Rado, Ball, Vacheron, and definitely Blancpain and Breguet. There's no strict, clear definition of who are doing well, and we don't really know, but I do think that some combination of brands like Cartier, Rolex, Patek, AP, Christopher Ward, Moser, Tudor, Longines, Underdog, Baltic, it's not completely off the mark. IWC as well. Tag, a little bit more in recent years, have also been doing well. Honestly, all of this is gut feelings based on sporadic data because I don't have access to actual individual sales numbers of these firms. Also, I don't think it's not as if one company is doing everything right and others are doing everything wrong, except maybe Breguet. Most brands are doing a lot of things right, and it's interesting to see what things that each brand is doing and which of the things are working in terms of preparing themselves for success with new customers in the future. Now, if we look at the kind of watches that are popular today, then, the watch market overall is in decline, but it's not dead at all. I think it's perfectly reasonable to say that brands that have strong options for dive watches, GMTs, sports, go anywhere, do anything type watches, and also good integrated bracelet watches have done really well for themselves in recent years. The Nautilus, the Rolex, those are marquee offerings that pull customers into Patek and AP respectively. I think the Ingenieur is a smash hit for IWC, much like the 12 has been a smash hit for Christopher Ward. People also can't seem to get enough of GMTs. So Tudor GMTs, Rolex GMTs, Longines GMTs. GMTs are pretty much everywhere these days. Go anywhere, do anything watches are everywhere as well. Nomos Club Sports, Aquaterras, Cartier Santoses. These are all these, integrated or non-integrated steel bracelet, oyster perpetual kind of popular watches. Colors that are most popular are the ones that have always been popular. It's black, it's white, it's blue, and sometimes it's green. For the 2020s so far, the template is the good all-round diver, all-round GMT or sports watch with a simple black dial and a really, really good bracelet. But there's also another kind of watch that is becoming super popular as well. It's these Studio Underdog watches. It's the Nomos Clubs. It's watches with colorful dials. It's like the Moser Streamliners and the AP 1159s, and probably what has been the most popular watch this decade by a million miles, which is the Moonswatch. I mean, that watch has sold in the millions. I doubt any other watch comes close to the Moonswatch. Tudor has also started catering to this crowd as well with, the flamingo pink and the flamingo blue chronographs. Tag has done it with the Kith watches. Even Rolex has kind of played into this space as well with, the bubble and the jigsaw dials and the pastel models that they had a couple of years back. It's kind of obvious, but the less popular watches are the dressier watches. Roman numeral, Clou de Paris, Breguets don't really fly off the shelves from the ADs. JLC's Master Ultra Thins and Reversos are gorgeous watches, but they don't really get that much attention. And whether it's the Omega DeVilles or the Tudor Royals or 1926 lines, these are not watches that most people talk about or care about. In terms of success for my customers, you guys are my customers here on YouTube. One of the best ways for me to know whether or not I'm doing a good job in terms of content is subscribers. So if you feel that I am making videos that are worthy of your time and videos that you enjoy watching, then please consider clicking the subscribe button because it is the best way for me to gauge whether or not I'm doing something that is worthy of your time. So click the button if you feel it warrants it. Thank you. I think we have to go back to the 2000s where Panerai, Breitling, and IWC were actually pretty hype. They had big chunky watches and big chunky watches were in. And if you'd have asked people back then, nobody would have thought that that would end. The hype was so strong that IWC completely reworked the Ingenieur in the 2000s. And it had nothing to do with the previous Ingenieurs. It was a big, hideous, monstrosity of a thing, but it was aimed at the market at the time. For me, the logic that those are doing good now, Rolex, Patek, AP, Swatch, and so on, also being the ones doing well in the future, is far from a given. Now, I doubt Rolex are going to disappear anyway. I think they're going to do perfectly fine. But just because black bays from Tudor are popular right now, it doesn't mean that they're going to be perennially popular in 2, 3, or 5 years' time, or at least hitting the zeitgeist. I do think that the brands themselves are giving indications of who is the best position to do well in the future, and it comes down to certain decisions on specific things that support what I think is a formula for success. And I'm going to give you some comparisons and examples to illustrate it. I made the case in a previous video that actual watchmaking credibility of a brand isn't necessarily that important in the high end. A lot of first-time Patek buyers, just as an example, have absolutely no clue as to how to assess the horological credibility of a Patek watch. The fact that a dial is stamped on a Patek is likely lost on them. And whether or not Breguet movements are always fully in-house or Lomania based or real or not real or the best in the business or not is not really hugely important. But Patek, on another dimension, are demonstrating how they are forward-thinking and speaking to a different kind of customer that Breguet are not. And I'll ask you, does Breguet have a dressy watch that actually looks sporty, like the 6007G from Patek? No. Does Breguet make use of textiles to give their watches a more contemporary look? No. Has Breguet leaned into softer, more contemporary fonts to modernize the look of some of their watches? Rarely. You could say they maybe did it with the Type 20, but generally, no. Patek consistently does that on a lot of models, all of those things. Now, not all of the things Patek do are equally good. I'm not a fan of everything they've done, but in general, you can take a look at Patek's catalog and you'll see how they fairly consistently have prioritized renewing and updating their lines and their individual models to give them a more youthful and modern experience. That's component one, updating designs to stay contemporary. Patek, as an example, do this fairly consistently. Breguet doesn't. Celebrity. AP is a marketing powerhouse, and one of the things they've done better than anybody is leveraging celebrity. If you're my age or older, you likely hate the association that AP has with rappers and footballers and basketballers and brash celebrities. But they understood that their product needed to be cool, and some old movie star like Tom Cruise, who is respected, but he's not really that cool dude compared to that Cactus Jack guy. It doesn't have to be rappers as such, but leaning into the cooler, younger celebrity is something that has served AP really well. And it's also something that served brands like Tudor reasonably well as well, with Beckham, Lady Gaga, and similar kind of brand ambassadors. Blancpain, as an example, don't leverage this at all. Then you've got branding collabs. Tag Heuer has Formula One now, Rolex doesn't. Now, Formula One to me is a super interesting discussion for a whole lot of reasons. Depending on how you look at Formula One, it can actually be perceived as both growing and declining. If you look at just the numbers from ESPN, they've had declining numbers for a couple of years in the US. When you look at traditional viewer metrics and traditional channels, Formula One, especially in Western countries, has been in viewership decline. But when you look at online viewership, social media, interest in drivers, teams, viewership overall is massively up. Formula One has a huge reach and the spend on advertising is massive. Viewership on social media is also younger and more diverse. So there's a couple of ways of looking at Formula One. Attention in Formula One definitely skews younger, and if your goal is future customers, then Tag Heuer clearly have the edge. On the other hand, the Formula One media landscape is incredibly fragmented and not particularly exclusive. You're just as likely to notice a Richard Mille logo or an IWC logo or a Bremont logo on a car as you are to notice that Tag is the main typekeeper. Growth in Formula One is also much more in emerging markets like China and Saudi Arabia, more than it is in Western Europe. On average, though, my gut feeling tells me that if the goal is getting new people into watches, then Tag probably made a very expensive but overall good decision. Rolex is going for the more exclusive sponsorships and the more elite sports, and that's on brand for them. But I'm not sure it's the wisest one if you want to make sure that you have future customers. Again, Rolex are going to be fine, but in this one isolated scenario, I think Tag are probably doing the right thing more so than Rolex. Color. Vacheron versus Moser. Why do I believe more in Moser? I do because of color. When Vacheron go really crazy, they throw in a salmon or a green dial. And sure, it's more inventive than blue or black, but it's not exactly super daring. Moser has matrix green and purple haze and pink something, I think it's called pink livery, which is one of the pinks I actually like. Their colors are vibrant, they're dials have more texture, they have more tone, they have gradations. All these things are just significantly more forward-looking and more youthful in their appeal. Rolex did it with pastels, which were more limited in nature, but they also did it. Another good example is Tudor. The pink chrono was a limited edition, but it really struck me that the flamingo blue is part of their new regular collection, and it's called the Daring Collection. The Daring Collection is now a regular part of their lineup. Now compare that to Omega. What did they do in 2024? They did a white dial Speedy, they did a two-tone Speedy, they did a black Seamaster, and they did a black dial Aquaterra. Tudor also did their black and blue dials, but it's the pink chrono and the flamingo blue and a rainbow limited edition black bay that really were front and center. They've had far more color in the releases, and I do think it gives them an edge for more future-proof customers. It's not just about color, it's also about being color-centric and not color-optional. Now, just before I go into this topic, it's important to say Studio, Underdog, Furlan, Mari, Baltic, they don't compete with JLC. It's different products for different segments at different prices, but there's still some interesting things to take note of in how they approach the market. And I've always talked about color and flair as a way to be more contemporary, but it's more than that. If you look at JLC, you'll see that black and blue and white are at the core of their lineup. That's the main thing they do. And if they do color in a reverso, it's more of a special edition or a seasonal release kind of thing. And the same goes for Omega, and the same goes for Rolex. They have the core colors, and then every now and again they throw out some special colors which, add to the seasonal variety, but they stick with the safe bets. But you know who doesn't? Nomos. They have color other than blue and black at the center of most of their marquee club lineup. Often, a lot of the club's appeal is that it's not just base blue and black, but it's pink and green and red and all sorts of other colors. Studio Underdog is color first. Oris, to a large extent, are also much more color first and not black and blue centric. The Pro Pilot X is available in a pastel-y kind of dull blue and a gray, but they push Kermit green and Miss Piggy and pink and all sorts of other aquases and divers lean more strongly into color. Some brands see color as a seasonal option, but some see it as the core of their offering. And by putting it at the core of their offering, they are sending a signal to a different kind of buyer, a more youthful kind of buyer, to say, we are not like the old brands. And having those colors at the center of their model lineup makes them more appealing to those kind of customers. At least I think so. Straps. Check out the Moonswatch. Apart from the color and the hype, you know what this watch had? Well, it didn't have a steel bracelet. It had a strap. The 1159 from AP is gaining ground and it's becoming quite popular. And its audience, at least according to AP themselves, is skewing younger than the regular Royal Oak buyers. For me, part of that is about textile style straps. Dad wears the steel watch with the integrated bracelet. The youngsters, as it were, go for the textile or carbon or rubber straps. They do that because that's what they've grown up with. The Apple Watch is textile or rubber first. Steel bracelets are not common. It's not common on Garmin's, it's not common on Suntos, it's not common on Apple Watches, and I think this carries over to preferences for watches and watch straps. The Moonswatch, the 50 Fathoms from Swatch, and a ton of others lean into this approach, and I'm fairly certain that it skews the product towards a younger audience. It's also about keeping the price lower, but old farts like me are probably still stuck in the mindset of always buy your watch with a steel bracelet, but it is less the case for these other younger demographics. Quick recap. You prioritize renewing your offerings. You get the right celebrities. You get into the edgy collabs. You embrace color. And you consider color as your core instead of it being a seasonal variation, and you go for straps. Now let's compare Tudor and Omega. Tudor has been super strong on renewal, celebrity, and edgy sports and collabs. They are embracing color much more aggressively without having it necessarily at their core. But they do now have the Daring watch lineup, which I think, apart from the steel bracelets, are very much aiming for a youthful crowd. Omega, on the other hand, they are far less aggressive on renewal. They've had a fairly conventional approach to celebrity and branding, sticking with the Benedict Cumberbatches, well, he's JLC, but Eddie Redmaynes of this world. Color is still seasonal, and it's still the classic steel bracelets that are their thing. All these things tell me that Tudor, from a future perspective, are in a better place. Now, that doesn't mean that Tudor is going to sell more watches than Omega, but in terms of capturing newer, younger customers, I think Tudor is better positioned. Another comparison, Formex versus Monta. Both are, relatively speaking, new brands, all things considered, and their offerings are more in the sort of classic diver sports watch category. So they're not strong there. They don't have the money for big celebrities and sponsorships. But one of the places where you see Formex is, where I think ahead, is they are far more about color and variety and aesthetic innovation. And it's very much at their core. They're not leading edge, but compared to Monto, who very much stick with classic GMTs and classic Submariner styles, Formex just has more color and more power and more edge to them that I think appeals to a younger audience. Last comparison, Moser and Journe. Now, just be clear, Journe are incredibly popular in the high end, and they are regarded by some as one of the most inventive and strongest brands out there today. But I've also got, and I think this is a quote I read somewhere online, which I think was a cool quote, which is, younger people see them as having a pretentious steampunk vibe. Moser has done more to renew themselves in recent years than Journe. Journe still pulls in the ultra heavy hitter clients, but Moser seems to be picking up the attention of some of the cooler kids. Moser's represented in Formula One. If the goal is keeping your current older rich people and having them buy your product, then Journe is likely doing absolutely fine. But Moser has an approach that is potentially more forward-looking. Moser's more colorful and has color closer to their core, and also design aesthetics that challenge classic conventions much more than Journe does. And I don't think, Moser and FP Journe are in direct competition. There's a very real price difference, but purely from a perspective of becoming popular with a younger crowd in the future, then Moser, I think, are better positioned. Hot takes. Rolex, Omega, JLC, they have got work to do. Tudor, Moser, Tag, they, in my opinion, because of all these things that they're doing, or components of what they're doing, are better positioned. To me, it's the brands that demonstrate more of these behaviors that I've outlined that are, to me at least, strong indicators of being power players or becoming power players and grabbing the headlines in the coming years. I've made my case. I may be completely wrong, but that's really not that important. It's the conversation that's fun. So I have some questions for you. Do you think the criteria for success are applicable? Do they make sense? Are they plausible? What would you add or change? And which brands, most importantly, do you see are best positioned to capture future watch buyers? Share in the comments below. Like, subscribe. Cheers.